Hey folks, welcome to Phantoms and Monsters Radio. Tonight, I'm going to discuss the Cryptid Four Corners investigative group and the cases of J.C. Johnson. Now, for decades, the American Southwest has been a landscape where boundaries blur between culture and biology, between folklore and lived experiences, and between what is supposed to exist and what witnesses insist they've seen. Now, tonight's episode focuses on a man who spent years operating inside the uncertainty. J.C. Johnson was not chasing legends, he was documenting patterns. Livestock deaths that didn't appear to be predation, upright predators that did not move like animals, winged humanoids that did not act like wildlife, and families who were not imagining what was happening to them. Now, I've worked with JC for almost a decade. I documented his investigations. I spoke with him repeatedly on air, and I watched case by case as his work revealed something important. These were not isolated incidents. They were recurring behaviors tied to specific regions, specific families, and specific conditions. Now, what you're about to hear are selected cases from JC's Cryptid Four Corners and their investigations. Each one stands on its own. But taken together, they form a disturbing continuous line. A geography where livestock are taken but not eaten, where predators demonstrate intelligence, and where beings appear to monitor, harass, and sometimes fixate on human families. Now, this is not a retrospective meant to glorify mystery. It's a record, and these cases were investigated. Witnesses were interviewed, and physical evidence was documented. And in many cases, the same anomalies reappeared. So listen carefully, not for answers, but for patterns. Now, this first case was from March of 2011 near Hogback, New Mexico, and this was on the Dene Navajo Reservation. Now, according to JC, a troubling livestock incident occurred in March of 2010 on the Dene Navajo Reservation near Hogback, New Mexico. Now, over a short period, 24 sheep belonging to a local farmer were found dead under unusual circumstances. The livestock owner reported that the sheep displayed large talon-like puncture marks, suggesting an aerial attack. Despite the apparent trauma, there was very little blood on the scene, and notably, no evisceration or feeding activity was observed. The carcasses were largely intact and left to where they fell, a behavior inconsistent with known predators such as coyote, mountain lions, or birds of prey common in the region. Now, the absence of scavenging, the minimal blood loss, and the precision of the injuries raised immediate questions. Now, if the animals had been attacked by a large flying predator, why were the carcasses abandoned? If this were predation, why was there no feeding? And these unanswered questions led to broader speculation, including whether the incident could have been attributed to a so-called chupacabra, a classic animal mutilation event, or even a covert experimentation linked to non-terrestrial or government-related activity. Now, JC proposed an alternative hypothesis that, while controversial, aligned with long-standing regional accounts. He suggested that a large cryptid bird or pterosaur-like creature may have been responsible. This idea gains weight in context when examined alongside persistent reports of giant birds across New Mexico and neighboring states. Now, for generations, residents of New Mexico and parts of Texas have reported sightings of birds so large they appear prehistoric in scale. One such account comes from Dave Zander, a longtime resident near Dona Ana Mountains in South America. A longtime resident near Dona Ana Mountains, and Zander had lived in the area for over 3 decades and spent much of the time hiking, exploring, and fossil hunting in the rugged terrain. Now, Zander described a sighting that occurred approximately 11 years before the 2010 sheep mutilations. Now, while observing the landscape, he noticed 2 massive creatures perched on a mountainside less than a mile away. He recalled that they appeared comparable in size to small aircraft. Now, suddenly, one of the creatures leapt from the mountaintop, dropped down the face of the mountain, and then unfurled its wings. Now, Zander estimated the wingspan to be at least 20 feet, far exceeding any known modern bird. Now, he described the creature as having a pink, bald head, an all-black body, and enormous feathered wings. The experience left him shaken, with the impression that the creature could have easily lifted a human being if it had chosen to. Now, no modern avian species match that description. Now, for comparison, the Andean condor, housed in the Rio Grande Zoo in Albuquerque, possesses a wingspan of approximately 12 feet, substantial but nowhere near the dimensions reported by Zander. Cryptozoologist Ken Gerhardt addressed similar sightings and noted that the 20-foot wingspan would represent a creature entirely undocumented by contemporary science. Gerhardt suggested that such sightings may represent a surviving teratorn, massive prehistoric birds believed to have gone extinct thousands of years ago. Now, Gerhardt had documented numerous reports of giant raptor-like birds worldwide, many of which were concentrated in the American Southwest, particularly in the Rio Grande Valley of Texas, New Mexico, and parts of Arizona. These cases are compiled in his book, Big Bird, Modern Sightings of the Flying Monsters, which catalogs decades of similar encounters. Historical parallels reinforce the persistence of this phenomenon. In 1972, near Maxwell in northeastern New Mexico, Ron Monteleone of Trinidad, Colorado, reported seeing what he believed to be a pterodactyl emerge from an arroyo. Now, in the late 1800s, residents of Lordsburg, New Mexico, frequently spoke of pterosaur sightings. A controversial photograph from Tombstone, Arizona, circulated in 1890, depicting a massive winged creature, though its authenticity has never been fully verified. Now, when viewed with the broader context, the 2010 sheep mutilations near Hogback did not stand in isolation, but appear embedded within a long-standing pattern of anomalous aerial encounters in the region. Now, several elements of this case merit focused attention. The talon marks combined with minimal blood loss suggest controlled trauma rather than chaotic predation. The lack of feeding behavior is critical and mirrors classic animal mutilation cases rather than wildlife attacks. Now, while large raptors can kill livestock, they typically feed immediately or drag prey away, neither of which occurred here. And the proximity of long-term reports describing giant avians or pterosaur-like entities introduces a possible explanatory framework that JC considered seriously. While extraordinary, this hypothesis aligns more closely with the physical evidence than conventional predator explanations. No definitive proof exists to identify the responsible agent. However, dismissing the cryptid bird theory outright ignores both the regional and historical record and the anomalous injury patterns observed in this case. Now, this incident near Hogback raises an unsettling question. If something capable of lifting and killing livestock from the air is operating in the Four Corners region, how often does it go unnoticed? The next follow-up case been an isolated presence, but part of a broader pattern unfolding across the Southwest. Now, after March 2010, as a follow-up to the March 2010 sheep mutilation near Hogback, New Mexico, JC documented another disturbing livestock incident on Navajo lands within the Four Corners region. Now, this subsequent event involved the killing of 7 sheep, including a large ram estimated at 300 to 400 pounds. Once again, the identity of the attacker remained unknown. However, the physical evidence immediately raised concerns that the responsible entity was not a conventional predator. Several of the sheep exhibited puncture wounds, particularly in the neck area, yet there was very little blood present at the scene. There was no indication of arterial spray, pulling, or extensive ground saturation that would normally accompany such injuries. Now, equally significant was the absence of feeding behavior. The carcasses were not consumed, dismembered, or scavenged in any recognizable manner. Despite this, the large ram had been dragged a considerable distance, an act requiring substantial strength. This detail suggested an upright or bipedal capability rather than a typical quadrupedal predator. Now, the pattern was familiar: minimal blood loss, precise trauma, no feeding, physical manipulation of heavy livestock. These characteristics closely mirrored classic animal mutilation cases and stood in sharp contrast to known wildlife behavior in the region. Now, local history added another layer of complexity. There had been long-standing reports of canine-like hominids in the area, entities often described as upright, intelligent, and capable of altering their appearance. Now, some witnesses associate these beings with shape-shifting phenomena. Now, JC noted that trace evidence from earlier events had been collected and was undergoing DNA analysis through results, though the results were not yet available at the time of the reporting. And I will say, since then, there hasn't been any match with any known animal through the samples. Now, within the Navajo culture context, such activity is sometimes attributed to a skinwalker, as also known as a mayakob, a being associated with transformation, predation, and violation of natural law. Whether folkloric, psychological, or literal, the behavior described in this case aligns closely with those traditional writings or warnings. The persistence of the attack suggests that whatever was responsible was actively hunting within the region and was unlikely to cease on its own. Now, not long after learning of this latest incident, I received a detailed response from an individual using the moniker Cryptid, who identified himself as a resident of the Dene Navajo reservation. Now, his message was sent to reply to an earlier inquiry and is reproduced here without alteration or as received, though I have shortened it somewhat. It was a long letter. But anyway, the correspondence was extraordinary in both tone and content. The writer explicitly rejected the label of skinwalker and instead described himself and others as ancient beings, eaters of all, neither good nor evil, existing outside conventional concepts of mortality. He claimed the ability to inhabit multiple forms, including human and animal forms, and described consciousness as fluid rather than fixed. Now, the message asserted that these entities did not die because instead transition, but they did a transition dispersing and reconstituting through biological and energetic processes. The writer claimed an ongoing relationship with humanity, guided by a higher law, and admitted that humans instinctively fear their true form. He said that feeding on humans had ceased eons ago, though self-defense remained permissible, and described the ability to mentally immobilize prey during feedings. Now, of particular interest were the references to individual feeding aversions or tells, including an explicit distaste for extremities such as hooves, feet, fins, pads, or wing feathers. This detail stands out when compared to mutilation cases in which extremities are frequently missing or avoided depending on the event. The correspondence concluded casually with references to modern daily life and employment juxtaposed against claims of immense age, nonlinear existence, and near limitless adaptability. Whether this message represents a culture metaphor, the psychological expression, deliberate provocation, or something else entirely remains undetermined. However, its timing and thematic overlap with the livestock attacks makes it impossible to dismiss outright. Now, this follow-up case reinforces several critical patterns. Bloodless puncture wounds, lack of feeding, and the ability to move a large animal point toward an anomalous actor rather than known predators. The repeated absence of blood suggests either advanced psychological control during the attack or postpartum or post-mortem manipulation inconsistent with wildlife behavior. The bipedal implication is significant. While large predators can drag prey, the combination of upright movement and precision injury supports witness descriptions of upright canine-like entities reported elsewhere in the region. Unsolicited correspondence from Cryptid should be treated with caution. It cannot be validated yet, but it seems thematic consistency with both indigenous lore and recurring features of mutilation. At minimum, it reflects deep cultural knowledge and an attempt to contextualize the phenomenon from within the local worldview. Now, until DNA analysis or direct evidence emerges, the case remains unsolved. However, it strongly suggests that the hogback mutilations were not an isolated incident, but part of an ongoing pattern. Now, two separate events, two clusters of livestock deaths and the same anomalies, the same unanswered questions. As JC continued his work across the Four Corners region, it became clear that these bloodless attacks were not confined to single locations or explanation. Now, the next case pushes the pattern even further, challenging the boundary between folklore, cryptozoology, and lived experience. But before we continue, if you're enjoying tonight's presentation and want to hear more stories like that, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Phantoms and Monsters Radio. It really helps us reach more people who are searching for answers about the unexplained. And make sure to click the notification button so you won't miss any of our live shows. Now, this is the case of the Night Stalker, or in fact, that's what we called it, the Night Stalker. This occurred in the Navajo Reservation in September 2012. It was Friday, September 21st, 2012, and JC and his Crypto Four Corners team were contacted regarding a series of escalating and deeply disturbing incidents at a family residence in the Four Corners region of New Mexico within Navajo lands. The activity had been going for approximately a month and had reached a level that left the family frightened and exhausted. The initial reports described persistent nocturnal disturbances around the home. These included loud clawing sounds, heavy scratching against exterior walls and windows, and low, indiscernible growls emanating from outside the residence. The disturbances were not random. They appeared targeted, focused primarily on the family's youngest daughter. Now, on multiple occasions, the daughter reported scratching and clawing at her bedroom window during the early morning hours. One night, she was awakened when something pressed against the window frame, moved the curtain, and attempted to reach inside. Terrified, she fled her room and sought refuge with her sister. In the days that followed, she discovered claw marks on her back, always in the same area, typically appearing as 4 overlapping scratches, as if inflicted one at a time. Items in her bedroom were found moved without explanation. And on one occasion, her mattress had shifted off the bed while the family was away from the home. Now, the activity was not confined to the interior. Physical damage was documented on both the house and the vehicle parked outside. Deep 3 claw marks were observed on the exterior walls and in the surrounding ground. A truck parked near the residence showed malicious chewing and clawing, particularly around the headlight, housing, and grill. The damage suggested deliberate force applied to weaker polymer components, as though the creature was attempting to tear apart methodically rather than randomly. There were also attempts to access a rabbit cage near the home. Witnesses reported seeing an upright creature shaking the cage and attempting to pull the door free. The plastic lattice was torn and bent, though the animal inside was not taken. So one night, after repeated disturbances, the father confronted whatever was stalking the property. Armed with a flashlight and a rifle, he searched the surrounding cornfield and openly challenged the intruder. Shortly after returning inside, the family heard a violent impact against the house. The external air conditioning unit was struck with enough force to push it out of position. Moments later, the father returned outside and again scanned the field. Now, near the edge of the cornfield, he observed something that has remained burned into his memory. In the beam of his spotlight, he saw slanted orange eyes, crouched low, suspended in a black mass with discernible body outline. The figure did not move like an animal. Instead, it appeared to glide laterally, shifting smoothly to the right without vertical motion. The witness fired at the entity, but it vanished and didn't return that night. Now, the cornfield itself showed unusual disturbance. Corn stalks were flattened and swirled, bent in a manner inconsistent with human activity, animals, or weather. There were few to no footprints, and when impressions were found, they were partial, often resembling a palm rather than a full foot. The movement through the field appeared elevated, as if something had traveled above the ground and landed intermittently. Witness descriptions of the entity varied slightly. One description likened it to the winged creature depicted in the Jeepers Creepers films. A second, more detailed account came from a witness who observed the being seated on the ground. The individual described a creature covered in gray hair, possessing a 3-clawed appendage, with a seated torso to head height of approximately 5 feet, suggesting a standing height of 8 to 9 feet. There was a strong indication that the entity possessed wings, which may explain the aerial approach patterns in the crushed corn patches where it appeared to land. A particular concern was the direct interaction between the daughter and the home's interior. The entity appeared capable of penetrating boundaries, manipulating objects, and leaving physical marks without fully entering the room. This raised the possibility that the phenomena was not entirely physical. JC noted that the case may involve multiple overlapping phenomena, including a potential supernatural or thought form component, making it difficult to determine intent or origin. Now, throughout the investigation, recurring evidence of 3 to 4 claw marks, unexplained movement, and targeted harassment of a single family member remains consistent. JC remarked that the emotional toll on the family was severe, calling it one of the most troubling aspects of the case. Now, this case presents one of the clearest examples of multi-layered anomalous activity documented by JC. Physical evidence such as claw marks, damaged property, and disturbed vegetation strongly suggest a corporeal entity capable of significant strength and deliberate action. However, the in-home manifestations, including scratches appearing on the daughter's body without clear physical intrusion, suggest an additional non-physical or liminal component. The repeated focus on the single individual is critical. Targeted harassment is not consistent with random wildlife encounters and is rarely observed in traditional cryptid cases. The entity's apparent ability to evade confrontation, excuse me, I'm having tongue-tied tonight, confrontation, move without leaving tracks and glide rather than walk further complicates the classification. Now, while winged humanoids have been reported elsewhere in the Four Corners region, the behavioral pattern here is distinct. This was not a fleeting sighting, and it was to sustain predatory attention escalating over time. Now, whether this case represents a single entity with complex capabilities or multiple phenomena occurring simultaneously remains unsolved. What is clear is that the activity demonstrated intent, persistence, and the capacity to induce fear. Now, by the time that investigation concluded, one thing was undeniable. The Four Corners region was not dealing with an isolated anomalies. Livestock mutilations, upright predators, and now a winged humanoid capable of breaching the boundary between outside and inside all pointed toward a broader pattern. As JC continued documenting these encounters, the question was no longer if something was operating in the landscape, but how many different forms this thing might take. Now, later on, Crypto Four Corners was asked to investigate a prolonged and increasingly severe livestock crisis affecting a ranching family in the Valles region of northern New Mexico. The family had operated cattle in this area for more than 20 years. Yet, over the previous 5 years, conditions changed dramatically. By the time the investigation began, the family had lost over 40 head of cattle, along with additional livestock under circumstances that defied a single conventional explanation. Because of the terrain, isolation, and the scope of losses, investigators immediately recognized that multiple potential agents could be involved. Initial considerations included cougars, bears, coyotes, and other known predators. However, additional factors significantly expanded the scope. These included reports of upright wolf-like entities, hairy hominids, and ultra-terrestrial activity and sightings of covert low-noise helicopters, often referred to locally as whisper choppers. Now, the investigative team was led by JC, joined by Navajo elder Leonard Dan and investigators Tom Serchia and Kevin Pickett. The Valles Caldera itself is a complex and demanding environment. Formed by an ancient volcanic activity, the region consists of bowl-shaped valleys filled with volcanic rock, open grazing land, dense forest, and mixed conifer growth. At higher elevations, alpine conditions dominate with cedar, juniper, aspen, and ponderosa pine. The ranch sat at roughly 9,400 feet, a setting that supports large wildlife populations, but also make livestock management extremely difficult. Now, during interviews, the family revealed a critical detail that reframed the investigation. Approximately 5 years earlier, their two daughters had witnessed a small male Sasquatch described as a furry one, standing around 4 foot tall. Now, over time, the same individual appeared to grow rapidly and was now estimated to stand around 8 feet tall. The family believed this young male continued to frequent the ranch and display persistent attachment to the daughters, who were now in their late teens. Now, while the team was on site, a striking development occurred. Rock stacks appeared overnight, placed deliberately around the perimeter of the ranch. Now, according to JC and Leonard, this behavior is consistent with territorial signaling. The stacks were interpreted as a warning, effectively marking the area as off-limits to other hairy hominids. Now, Leonard offered a cultural interpretation that carried significant weight. He suggested that the livestock deaths and property damage could be a form of demonstrative behavior, with the young male Sasquatch attempting to exhibit strength, dominance, and capability to attract the daughters. This behavior, while alarming to humans, may mirror courtship or status displays observed in other intelligent species. Now, the family reported that for years the same individual would climb trees near the house at night and emit vocalizations directly towards the daughters. Both young women stated that the calls affected them mentally and physically, leaving them distressed and uneasy. JC noted that there had long been speculation that hairy hominids may possess the ability to influence human perception or cognition, particularly during close or prolonged exposure. Now, additional anomalies complicated the case further. The team documented several cattle carcasses that exhibited traits consistent with classic cattle mutilation cases. Facial tissue, glands, tongues, and anal regions were removed with apparent precision. Most notably, none of the carcasses were scavenged. Coyotes, cougars, vultures, porcupines, insects, even beetles avoided the remains entirely. The hides and bones remained in place for months or even years, slowly weathering into the landscape without disturbance. Drag marks associated with several carcasses were particularly unusual. In multiple instances, the hind legs trailed along the ground while the front legs remained elevated, suggesting the animal was being carried or dragged in a manner inconsistent with that of known predators. Now, the family also reported sightings of a bipedal wolf-like entity, fully upright and with pointed ears and smooth two-legged locomotion. This description raised the possibility of a lichen or dogman type presence operating alongside either other phenomena. JC cautioned against attributing all activity to a single culprit, noting that the convergence of elk herds, which he described as the livestock of the furry people, may have drawn additional entities into the region. Now, the return of the elk herd after 20-year absence coincided with the increase of activity. With the herd came what JC referred to as elk herders, adding another layer of complexity. Simultaneously, the family documented quiet military-style helicopter activity, including sightings of uniformed personnel seated in open doorways, feet resting on the skids as the aircraft passed silently overhead. Now, after weeks of investigation and later reflection, JC concluded that The situation involved multiple overlapping factors. Now, while young male Sasquatch appeared to have a clear attachment to the daughters, the broader pattern of mutilations, aerial activity, and upright predators suggested a convergence rather than a single cause. Now, this case illustrates a critical limitation in anomalous activities or investigations. Attribution bias can obscure the full picture. Now, while presence of a young male Sasquatch with apparent attachment to daughters or human daughters is compelling, the scale and variety of livestock losses exceed what could reasonably be attributed to a single entity. The lack of scavenging remains one of the strongest indicators that non-conventional involvement. In natural systems, carrion does not remain untouched. The prolonged avoidance of carcasses strongly suggests either chemical alteration, energetic contamination, or perceived threat by other animals. Appearance of rock stacks, territorial behavior, and demonstrative destruction aligns with intelligent agency. However, the simultaneous presence of bipedal canids, aerial craft, and classic mutilation signatures argues for the multi-actor environment rather than a single predator. This case underscores the importance of resisting simple explanations when evidence points toward layered activity. Now, by the end of the Valais Caldera investigation, one conclusion was unavoidable. The Four Corners region was not hosting isolated events. It served as an intersection point where biological, cryptid, and possibly non-human forces overlapped. And as JC continued his work, the pattern expanded beyond livestock and land. Now, this next case and final case shifts from territorial and predation to something far more personal, where proximity alone appears to invite interaction. Now, for the final case of this episode, the Cryptid Four Corners team undertook a series of expeditions into an undisclosed mountain range within the Navajo Nation, an area long associated with anomalous wildlife reports, cultural memory, and modern encounters. The investigative group with this operation included J.C. Johnson, along with Ron Rieger, David Weatherly, Leonard Dan, and Tom Sochia. Now, these investigations were not focused on a single creature, but were instead designed to document a convergence zone, a landscape where multiple unknown or poorly understood entities appeared to coexist. Now, JC anchored the case by revisiting a personal sighting from 2003, which occurred not far from the Four Corners Monument. While traveling across the high desert highway, JC and his companions noticed a large animal moving parallel to the road. They pulled over, positioned themselves roughly 40 to 50 yards from the creature as it crossed in front of them. Now, what JC observed defied conventional classification. The animal resembled a bear in overall mass, estimated between 900 to 1,000 pounds, yet its proportions were wrong. It possessed a long neck, short ears, a shortened face, unusually long legs, and more strikingly, a long bushy tail, a feature not associated with bears native to the region. The creature's movement was confident and deliberate, and it showed no alarm at nearby vehicles. Now, JC immediately considered the possibility that the animal represented a relic species, potentially a surviving remnant from the Pleistocene era. One candidate was the Arctodus simus, commonly known as the short-faced bear, a massive carnivore believed to have gone extinct approximately 11,600 years ago. Fossil evidence indicates that this species occurred across much of North America, from Alaska to Mississippi, and some estimates suggest individuals may have weighed well over 1,000 pounds. The relatively recent timing of its supposed extinction leaves, however, slim room for survival in an isolated area. Another speculative candidate mentioned during the discussion was a sarcodon, a far older and more controversial possibility, though JC acknowledged that the evidence for such a survival scenario would be exceedingly difficult to support. Now, the sighting was not unique. A local rancher named Ben, who had spent his life herding sheep and cattle in the mountains of the reservation, reported that he and his wife had observed a bear as big as a horse running across the valley, viewed clearly through binoculars. The consistency between JC's description and the rancher's account added weight to the possibility that something outsized and undocumented was operating in the region. Now, petroglyph specialist Ron Rieger provided critical cultural context. He explained that the native rock art in the Southwest should not be dismissed as symbolic or decorative. According to Rieger, petroglyphs function as records, the newspapers of their time, documenting significant events, environmental features, and encounters. He noted that several glyphs found in caves near Moab, Utah, appear to depict large bear-like creatures, suggesting that indigenous populations had real-world interaction with animals far larger than those recognized by modern zoology. Now, these expeditions also served another purpose. Johnson emphasized that whatever investigators established a camp in this region, they became the main attraction. The so-called furry ones, a term used by J.C. and Leonard Dan to describe the hairy hominids, routinely announced their presence. This typically occurred through stone throws, tossed branches, or deliberate noise, actions interpreted not as attacks but as reminders that humans are guests within the occupied territory. As night fell, the investigations often transitioned into informal campfire discussions during which additional anomalous encounters were shared. Now, Tom Sirica recounted an unsettling experience from early 2000s in Manhattan, of all places, where he encountered a young woman seated at a sidewalk cafe. She appeared be between 18 to 21 years of age and was speaking into a telephone in a language Sirica could not identify, despite the multicultural environment of New York City. Now, when he looked closely, he noticed that her eyes were entirely black, glossy, and reflective, with no visible whites. The woman appeared completely detached from her surroundings. Now, years later, Sirica learned of reports involving black-eyed children and adults, a realization that cast the encounter in a new and disturbing light. Now, David Weatherly then shared a case that resonated strongly with the regional setting. Now, while driving a truck in the 1990s along what was then known as U.S. Route 666, often called the Devil's Highway, Weatherly noticed a wolf dart onto the road, and as he continued driving at approximately 45 to 50 miles per hour, the wolf paced the truck effortlessly. When Weatherly accelerated to 60 miles per hour, the animal maintained speed. Then, without breaking stride, the wolf rose onto two legs and continued running bipedally alongside the vehicle for several miles. Approaching a curve, Weatherly slowed, and the creature abruptly veered off into the rocks and vanished. He described the encounter as one of the most bizarre experiences of his life, a conclusion few would dispute. The highway itself cuts through territory considered sacred by the native people, passing near Ute Mountain and the volcanic core known as Shiprock, both of which were long associated with strange sightings and transformative entities. Now, this final case, functions less than a single investigation and more as a composite snapshot of the Four Corners anomalies. Large bear sightings stand out due to their biological specificity. Unlike vague monster reports, the creature JC described had consistent anatomical features that sharply diverged from known species while aligning partially with extinct megafauna. Equally important is the culture continuity. Indigenous petroglyphs, rancher testimony, and modern sightings formed a layered record that spans generations. This continually weakens arguments that such encounters are purely modern misinterpretations. The campfire accounts, while secondary, reinforce a broader pattern. Black-eyed individuals, skinwalker-like entities, and bipedal canines are not isolated folklore elements, but recurring reports tied to specific geographies. Now, taken together, this case suggests that the Navajo Nation mountain regions may act as ecological and phenomenology refuges, places where relic species, cryptids, and other unexplained phenomena persist beyond the margins of accepted science. Now, with this investigation, a clear boundary is reached. The cases presented in this episode do not exhaust J.C. Johnson's work. They establish a pattern: livestock mutilations, upright predators, winged humanoids, territorial hairy hominids, possible relic megafauna. Each case overlaps the next, not neatly, but persistently. The Four Corners region does not offer simple answers. It offers repetition, escalation, and continuity. In the next episode, the focus will shift deeper into additional cases that extend these patterns further, introducing new locations, new witnesses, and encounters that press even harder against conventional explanation. Now, I do want to know here and state, what does the Four Corners reveal? The cases you've heard tonight were not chosen for shock value. They were chosen because they repeat. Sheep are killed without being fed on. Cattle left untouched by scavengers. Upright predators that move with intent. Winged humanoids that return night after night. Hairy hominids that mark territory, form attachments, and react to human presence. And witnesses who live with these encounters long after the investigators leave. Now, JC understood something early on. When too many explanations are required to dismiss a case, dismissal is no longer analysis. It's avoidance. What makes the Four Corners region unique is not the number of reports, it's the overlap. Biological anomalies occur alongside cultural memory. Physical evidence appears next to behavior that suggests intelligence. And generations of people describing the same thing in different languages. These cases do not resolve neatly. They are not meant to, actually. They are reminders of some landscapes retain memory. Some territories are shared, and some phenomena do not announce themselves clearly or briefly. This episode closes one chapter of JC's documented work. There are many more cases, and we will continue with them in next installment, either later down the road or whenever. We'll just see. Maybe we'll be next week, but I don't know. I think we're going to skip every once in a while. But if you live in these regions, and if you work the land, and something has followed, washed, and or returned, you're not alone. Now, if you have experienced anything like this or had an unexplained encounter or sighting, you can send your report to Families of Monsters. And as always, thanks for listening. Now, we're going to get to the questions. Okay, folks, just put your questions up there. Sasquatch, wasn't one theory for the San Luis Valley cattle mutilations was related to military research contaminating groundwater, then helicopters ducting them to test tissue for cancer or poisoning? Yeah, that was one speculation. I've heard several explanations, actually. That San Luis Valley is really... It's really strange. I mean, there have been a lot of animal mutilations over the years. There's been some connection with possible government facilities, not necessarily in northern New Mexico, but down further. Some of them surround Los Alamos labs in some other areas there as well. There's also a lot of rumors of underground passages that extend as far as California. So, I don't know. Is it really government involvement? Are they just out there watching people in helicopters, or what's the real reason? We just don't really know. I mean, we can speculate, but honestly, there's so many weird things that happen out there. And look, the next series of stories from our reports from JC are going to demonstrate government involvement. So stay tuned for that. Other questions? Dagnammit. People seeing cryptids and missing time. Is there a connection? There may be. It just depends what the missing time was. Was the missing time actual physical removal from an area, or was it something psychological? It could be either, of course. I don't know. Some of the cases that JC did investigate did include some missing time, but I don't think they had anything to do with any type of abduction or anything. I think they were psychological. I think maybe the cryptids or whatever they were investigating caused that missing time through some type of supernatural ability. We've all heard about the about infrasound and other possible aspects of cryptids, but is it conducive with missing time? I don't know. I really don't know. Peace. Have you personally had paranormal encounters lately? I have paranormal encounters all the time. I see things, I sense things. I talk to people, I work with people. I work every day with people that have encounters or have things that happen to them that need explained. And sometimes it rubs off on me. I mean, that's just the way it is. I keep myself protected for the most part, but it happens. It's just part of what I do. So, yeah, I mean, I experience paranormal activity all the time. Dynamic. Could it be feasible that the Glimmer Man may actually be a pale crawler? I guess it could be if the pale crawlers have some type of ability to make them so translucent like that. I guess it could be. Yeah. I mean, I never really thought about it in those terms. But yeah, it's a possibility. Any more questions? Grandizer. Lon, what made J.C. Johnson's research unique to the paranormal field? What sticks out to you that made him stand out? He wasn't afraid to tell people what he thought. Even more so than most cryptozoologists, people who investigate cryptids or the unknown. And many times, and that's one thing about JC. He wasn't the most couth individual, but he had his own way, and I think he had some psychic abilities. To be honest with you, I think he could pick up on a lot of things. I really do. But no, he was, he wasn't afraid to get onto a radio show or anywhere else. I remember him being on Coast to Coast talking this, and people questioned his sanity, but that's the way JC was, and he had a lot of real talented investigators with him. So yeah, he and just from these cases I talked about tonight, I mean, they're fairly unusual. I know a lot of those cases affected me in the way I saw things. Anything else, folks? Grandizer, Lon, no one close to JC ever tried to continue his work, right? Is there someone now that you know of that might be JC-like in research? He was a one of a kind, to be honest with you. I do miss the things he investigated. I don't know if it was something to do about the reservation, because look, he ran into problems with the tribal elders and others who didn't really want him looking into some of this stuff. When you talk to folks on the reservation and try to get them to talk about skinwalkers, especially the older folks, it's like pulling teeth. It's hard to get anything out of it. Now, some of the younger ones will talk about it. If they had an encounter or if they heard a story from a relative. But now JC's website, or his YouTube channel is still active. All his cases are still there. You can watch the old videos. Just put JC Johnson in the search; it'll come up. It's he was just one of a kind. He really was. Sean Forker and I talk about him all the time. Yet, I mean, after almost a decade of even talking to him, but he was a unique individual, and I respected him. He had his own way, but he was a very good investigator. Grandizer, Line, you had the honor of interviewing J.C. Johnson. To you, what was the legacy he left behind? Any idea where he wanted to take the channel or research had he not passed away? Well, he was actually living up in Minnesota when he passed. And he was looking into a couple of anomalies up there around several of the native lands in northern Minnesota. Upright cryptids, upright canines, Bigfoot, and also little people. And they've got a legend. It was an Ojibwe folklore legend, but they caught photographs of these things. So I don't know what the whole deal was. He sent it to me. I reported it. I never went up there and looked into it, but I may reprint that onto the website eventually. But it was, he did look into a lot. I don't know how far. JC was kind of a free spirit. He didn't really. I don't think he really had any intention of just making anything off of what he was doing. That's just what he wanted to do. Dagnammit, when is the Shimmering Invisible Heatwave Humanoid book coming out? Probably within the month. We have the cover done. We have most of the editing done. It's just a matter of the publisher. And these publishers have been really swamped with books. The book was done in September, and we're just getting around to getting it close to being published. But it will be out soon. Can Squatch, anything that surprised you or that influenced your research from JC? Some of the cryptids were a little hard to buy into at first until I started seeing photographs of them. And these were photographs that were private photographs from the people who lived on the reservation, some that JC had, but he didn't want to. And at some point, I think he would have publicly put them out there, but for the most part, he didn't do it. They weren't manipulated photographs. Some of the sizes of these furry ones are Bigfoot or immense. I'm talking 10 to 12 foot tall creatures. And you could look by scale to see how tall they were. It was at a distance, but these things were huge. The night stalker report that I talked about with the flying being, that all happened before I got involved with the Chicago winged humanoids, and it helped me to try to understand a little bit of what people had been experiencing and how they were reacting to it. I think that case helped me more than anything because there was something definitely supernatural about that being. And, I didn't dismiss that when I started looking into the Chicago sightings. There was something definitely supernatural about those beings as well as others. So, yeah, that probably influenced me more than anything. How did JC pass? He had pneumonia. He was in his early 50s, I think. Anything else? Okay. Well, again, stay aware, stay safe, and as always, keep looking into the unexplained. I'm probably going to skip a couple of weeks before I go into the next batch of JC's investigations. There's some other things I want to put out there as well. Again, if you have suggestions, contact me by email. My email, you go to my website, and you can even send me a note on the website with a report. So all I want to say is next Friday we'll be back, and you have a great weekend. Stay safe and have a good night.